Hello, everyone, and welcome to Demystifying Session Zero, a panel that we're very excited to bring here to D&D Celebration 2021. So before we get started into what Session Zero is, all that great stuff, I do want to start off by saying, hi, I'm Kiana. I am the host, the moderator, and one of the panelists here for this panel. I'm very excited to be here and to have all these wonderful faces around me who are also here to bring their expertise on running games and session zeros, whether it's in actual plays or in convention games or private paid games or home games. They're some of the best of the best. I'm very excited to have them here and to be talking with us so we can help give you advice on how to best run session zeros because they're really important and they make your games better, whether you're a new DM or whether you've been playing and running games for several years. So without further ado, I do want to say hello to all of our other wonderful panelists here. Tell us who they are, a little bit of background about what they do and all that good stuff. So let's start off with Lauren. Hello, Lauren.
Hi, we've never met before.
Never, ever.
Wink. I am Lauren. I'm that salty ginger over on Twitter. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also the salty half of Salty Sweet Games with my best friend Kiana. She's right there. Incredible. I do a lot of things in the tabletop community besides streaming. I've been a professional game master. I work for Roll20 on the content conversion team and many other things. I wear a lot of hats. There are many within reach of me right now. I think 5. That's what I have told you about myself. Hello. I'm very excited to talk about Session Zeros because I love them. Think they're great. That's me done.
Hooray. All right. And let's go over to RK. Hello, RK.
Hi, I'm RK Wild. I am a podcaster, streamer, safety consultant, and professional GM. I'm a safety consultant currently with Start Playing Games, which is a site that allows GMs to run pro games and get paid for their work. And I'm also the GM of Prison Pals and the creator of Fear in Living Color, a soon to be coming out actual play podcast. And you can find me on Twitter at Russ Wildest.
Hell yeah. And let's go over to Connie. Hello, Connie.
Hey everyone, I'm Connie, pronouns they, he, and she. I am a professional GM, game designer, and screenwriter. My bread and butter thing is Transplanar RPG, which I am the GM and producer for. It is an all transgender, people of color led, 100% homebrew, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition live streamed actual play campaign set in an original non-colonial anti-Orientalist world. If that sounds like your jam, check us out Saturdays at 3 p.m. US Central Time on Twitch. Or you can check out our podcast, which drops every Tuesday, actually. We've been on a really nice weekly schedule for that good actual play content. I've run games for Magpie Games curated play program for as a paid GM. I've done plenty of home games, running D&D, running Masks, all sort of systems out there. And I'm really also excited to be bringing the perspective of a game designer to this conversation as well. And really excited to dig into the topic today with my fellow panelists here. So I'm going to pass the baton back to Kiana.
Perfect. And I said a little bit about myself, but a little bit more. I'm Kiana. My pronouns she and they. I'm all over the internet as at Kiana S. I am a TTRPG designer, streamer, and also the co-curator of the TTRPG Safety Toolkit, a resource, free, accessible resource that is made to help safety and support tools be more accessible and usable for people by compiling them all in one place. Yeah, and you may also recognize me from my work in Candlekeep Mysteries as well, and just kind of floating on the internet. I'm sure you've heard me in some places or another. And if not, hi, nice to meet you. So we're going to kind of just get into this. Basically, we're just going to do a little bit of a 101 about what Session Zero is, and then hop into not only that, but also how you can use Session Zeros as a GM and be able to really leverage all the cool information that you get from there, when you should be running it, how you should be running it if you're running it for your friends versus a group of strangers you're playing with for the first time. Oh, and we're just going to kind of hop back and forth between all of these important topics to talk about and making sure that you have the most use out of this really useful tool. It's probably one of the most powerful tools that you can have in your DMing toolkit. So yeah, so basically, I guess we should start off with, what is session 0? You know, penultimate question of all this, in case you're coming in from this. There is a really great thing that in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, I have the fancy cover here. But in this, we actually get an introduction to session 0s. There's also several other places where you can learn more about session 0s. But the basics of it is that when you're a DM, you have plenty of things to think about when you're about to run a game. So that includes making sure that everyone is on the same page about, you know, what the one shot or campaign or whatever game you're going to be running is going to be like for you and your players. So session 0 is a tool that helps you just with that, with setting those expectations. That includes also setting the tone, any content boundaries. So if anyone says yes or no that they want to have in the game, it also helps you set expectations for character creation, deciding, you know, what characters are going to be involved in this campaign or this game that you're going to be playing, and just general stuff about how to make your game more fun for everybody that's going to be there. Have I missed anything? Does that feel like it encompasses what a session 0 is?
Yeah, that feels like a good starting point.
Yeah. So setting expectations, that's the basics of it. But beyond that is a very, very powerful tool that you can use. You know, you're going to get a lot of information when you're doing a session 0. And we're going to talk about, you know, stuff like, when do you use it? When do y'all use session 0s in your games? Because, you know, from the name, it kind of sounds like it doesn't start anywhere, session 0.
So the name's a bit of a misnomer for me. I run session 0s at the start of a campaign before we meet characters, before we do all that stuff. But I also revisit session 0s. So if we've had a long break, like if there's a season break when it comes to an actual play, if like something really tense has happened in a previous session and like players have expressed concerns, or I have concerns about safety things, we'll run another session 0. And it's more just like, it is called session 0, but for me, it's more of use when safety is a concern or when like you're just getting back and need to get more comfortable with each other again. And so for the first part, you use it when you first start, and then you use it when you need to afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I use session 0, even if I'm only playing one session of a game, I will still have a section of that session that I call session 0. For safety, for genre and tone a lot, because I run a lot of horror games, right? So I like to set that up before we actually even get into it, so everybody kind of knows what we're all going for as we tell this story together.
Just to sort of echo what everyone else has said already, even for like a one shot, which I run usually 3 to 4 hours a piece. Usually the first hour I dedicate to the entirety of session 0 of that, which includes setting expectations, character creation, going over rules and safety tools, and anything else we might have missed during that like initial setup phase. So session 0 really, to me, I feel like there's like a little bit of like in the D&D community of like, what's a session 0? We don't need that. Come like first session, guns a-blazing, ready to role play. And I'm like, that's a dangerous road to tread down, my friend, because I feel like that just sort of breeds a table where no one really knows how to talk about conflict, and you sort of have to count on the GM to also be a facilitator in addition to a game master, which is a different tool, which is a different set of skills, I would say, than it takes to like actually run like a campaign in a game. So I would say like session 0s, I run them I always have them, whether it's like one-on-one session 0s, if like we can't all get together and meet before like the start of a campaign, or if it's just an over Discord, or if it's like this, like we all sit down in a Zoom meeting and we talk about it before the actual campaign begins. Whatever fits the table, fits the needs, and fits the actual game we're going to be playing, whether it's a one-shot, streamed, home, paid, whatever.
I love what you said, Connie. Session 0, GM being slightly different from facilitator. Like, I feel like a session 0 can take some of that pressure and expectation off of the GM that can happen if you don't have one of these and you're in the middle of the game. And like, of course, you're the GM. You have to decide how this resolves. Like, well, if you have a session 0, maybe you've already discussed that, or maybe you have the tools to discuss that. So it doesn't all fall on the GM's shoulders while they're also, juggling everything to do with the campaign, the lore, the mechanics, all of that. So I think it's a great way to kind of lift the burden off the GM's shoulders just a little, which is always nice.
That's a really good point. And actually, I think it's leading right into, what I want to talk about next, which is, why is it important to have a session 0 and set expectations at the table? Connie, you kind of touched on that already, where, if you just go in guns blazing and there's no expectations set, you kind of can just end up stranded in the middle of your game, unsure of where to go next.
Muppet
it's
arms.
Never great. just kind of look around and be like, I don't know what's going to happen next. But yeah, I mean, when we say set expectations, I think we mean several things here. So there are some things which are, setting expectations about, the tone. Lauren, you kind of talked about this with, like, are we going for a spooky story? Are we going for super high powered action adventure where we're going to feel really powerful heroes? Or are we going to, go on to Strahd's Barovia and feel like everything's terrible and that you feel very powerless? Like, that's gonna, if someone comes in with very different expectations of what kind of game that is, in that sense, it's very jarring, because that's how you get joke characters that are coming into a very serious game, and you're like, this is a great character, but maybe not in when we're trying to do this very serious game about morality or something like that. How else? Why else is it important to set expectations? Like, what kind of expectations are you setting in session 0?
One thing that I always set expectations with is safety. So like, I specifically use the safety toolkit and go over the tools that I use at my table. In addition, it's also important to set expectations when it comes to like table rules. If you've changed rules with the game, if you have specific rules as a GM of like, hey, if someone's in a scene, don't interrupt that scene. Like, don't do that. Don't like butt into their moment. Let them have their moment. Or if it's stuff like, hey, if you're gonna be late, let us know. It can be like small things of expectations of just like common courtesies that maybe they don't have at other tables, or like you want to establish so it's understood with everyone. And talking, like you said, talking about like characters, you don't want to be the person who shows up with a high magic elven wizard in the grimdark no magic fantasy setting. Because then that entire idea you built, that entire character you've created, immediately in the garbage. Doesn't fit in the world. Can't work. But also works for a GM because you can set expectations of like what you want from your players. Like, one of the things that I do is I use stars and wishes. And we do that right at the end of session 0. And stars and wishes is a safety system, for those who don't know, that allows players to say, hey, here were things that I really liked, and here are things I'm really looking forward to. And it allows my players to basically say, hey, here's what I want from the future sessions, here's what I want to explore in the story-wise, which means that once session 0 is done, I can then go and do a bunch of planning and like take the notes I have from what they said and use it against them. Like, it's great. It does excellent work for you.
Mm-hmm. I'm also a big advocate of doing less work as a GM always.
Yes.
I feel like that needs to be taped up on my wall where I can see it. Also, to sort of echo what RK has said, a question I always ask for longer term campaigns is, what do you want to get out of this experience? Right? Like, what are you looking for? What's your power fantasy here? Right? Like, why are you playing this game? And like, how can I cater to that? Right? Or how can I build encounters around that and make sure that everyone sort of gets to shine throughout the course of the campaign? Basically, like, I have players who are like, I'm here to get real messed up. Just mess me up. Here are a bunch of knives. Stick me with them. And then there are players who are like, if you touch my character, I, as the player, will cry. I will like burst into tears in a real bad way, and I will not be able to handle it. And I'll be like, great, I need to make sure I don't like accidentally stick knives in the sensitive player, right? And like give like the player who wants to become like a knife block, like all of the fluffy romances, right? I also think like specifically in terms of D&D 5th edition session zeros, which I run kind of differently from other systems, I will have my players rank the 3 pillars of play. And if they really truly don't have a preference, then that's also useful. I'll be like, do you prefer combat, roleplay, or exploration, right? Like some players be like, I like all of them, you know, and some players will be like, I really don't like puzzles. Please, for the love of God, don't give me puzzles in that aspect of exploration. Like, don't give that to me. And some players will be like roleplay above everything. I don't really like combat. And that's also really useful for me when I'm designing encounters specifically in 5th edition. And like their answers, you know, my players' answers always help me with designing the feel of the campaign and also what the story will look like. And I, you know, session 0 is also a opportunity for me to generate seeds for session 1. I want to make sure that what RK said, the wishes they might have come up with during session 0, I always like to have a wish list. And I'll be like, what are specific things you want, in addition to lines and veils, like stuff we're just not going to touch, right? We're touch with caution. Like, what are things that you actively are inviting me to throw at you, right? And I'll try to like start throwing those things in like starting session 1, so people already feel like, oh, dang, like all the stuff we generated, all the grist we've set down, all the seeds we've sown in session 0 are already bearing fruit, right? Already starting to sprout, and that usually generates a sense of excitement as well, because I feel like some people see session 0s as like, oh boy, we got to talk about the bad stuff. We got to talk about what's not allowed, which is true, you do, but also it's like an opportunity for you to share your hopes and dreams for the campaign and for the game.
Yeah, y'all have both covered a lot of what I like to do in my session 0s as well. I'll sometimes even, like, specifically for actual plays, if we're putting out like a casting call, I'll try to do even some of that work in the casting call. So it's not limited to just this one session, as you were saying, RK. We ran a horror podcast recently called Missing Annie Lee. And when we put out that casting call, it was like, this is not about longevity. We're not going to explore lands. We are going to tell this kind of real people in horrifying circumstances story. And it is about leaning into that danger. It is about putting your character at risk. So it may just not be the game that you want to do. But for those who want to, they have that expectation, and you kind of find, you know, your people for this particular story. I also really like to use for expectations. I'll say it, I am not a world builder. I don't always enjoy fleshing out the entire world, but you know what I love is using session 0 and the players who have assembled to build the world. That is my favorite thing. I think that can absolutely be a part of your session 0 to set the expectations, because then you're not the only one setting them, right? Like, you're sharing the reins and the creation of the world together. So it's like a form of stars and wishes, right? Because now your players have come up with this, you know what they're interested in, what they've brought to the table. So you can say, oh, okay, well, now I'll flesh out that because I know my characters were interested in that. Yeah.
And that's sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was saying, that's exactly the thing, right? So part of what I do for my session 0s is that once we've gone through all the safety stuff, I always start with that. We get into the actual characters and everything, right? And what I'll do is I'll look at my players and be like, okay, tell me about your character. Tell me about what you have, what you don't have. If you don't have anything, that's fine. I'll go to someone else who might have something. We'll start building them out. And I'll tell them basically, tell me a little summary of your character and what their life was like, what's important to them, that kind of stuff. And the player will go through and describe their character. And then what I'll tell everyone at the table is ask questions. Ask whatever questions you want to ask, and I'll ask questions too. I play a lot of Monster of the Week. It's one of the games that I run the most, especially as a paid GM. And there's a whole history section that we don't even touch until we understand the characters and who we're going into the story with. So I've had players who've asked incredible questions that I would have never thought of. Like, oh, I have this character who's a teenager, they're fighting monsters. And one of my players looks at that person and goes, okay, if you're fighting monsters, What happened to your family? Where are they? Where are they in this picture? And it just immediately like completely changed the tone for that character and made it like less of a like, yay, I'm fighting monsters, and more of like, oh, something tragic happened, and allows to build out the story. And then once again, as a GM, you pull those knives, you take those knives and you put them into the campaign and throw it at them. And like, not only does it allow you to plan for the characters, but allows for players to plan around each other. Allow them to think like, okay, how's my character going to react to you? Or how's my character going to react to you? If we've been in the same group together for months and months, how do we handle each other? How do we react? Are we friends? Are we more than friends? Do we hate each other? And like, I feel like it really allows players to enter session one with a rapport already going.
Yeah, that gives them like confidence, because you're not like, how do we interact? I don't know, because you figured some of that stuff out, and it'll change. Of course, it'll evolve. But yeah, that stuff is so much fun. I think it's in Tasha's. They have this little table about like origins, party origins and party formation. It's all about asking questions. I think, are any of the characters related to each other? Like, what keeps you together? How did you meet? Like, things like that. Just asking those questions will prompt a response, which is, questions are great. Questions, bread and butter. Always ask questions, even if it's just like, what do you do?
What do you do? Why are you here? What's going on? And I mean, I think we've touched on it several times with RK and stuff. But yeah, setting the expectations about safety at the table and content boundaries and invitations are really, really important in session 0 and are a great opportunity to do that. So, talking about what safety tools are you going to be using? There's so many out there and different ones work for different tables. There's lines and veils, there's X and O cards, there's stars and wishes, there's the Luxton technique. I could spend literally days like just listing off all of them. Check out the TTRPG safety toolkit. But really what you're looking for in a session 0 when you're setting expectations about the table is, making sure that everyone is bought in to whatever way that you're making sure everyone feels comfortable and safe doing this stuff. And what we mean by safe is, that no matter what terrible things are happening to the characters, because there can be terrible things happening to the characters, the players are still enjoying themselves and having fun. Because that's at the end of the day, that's what we're here for, is to have fun at the table. And sometimes that can be by doing, touching upon typically uncomfortable subjects. So that can happen with, engaging in scary things. But that shouldn't come at the cost of, actually hurting your players or actually, doing anything harmful to them or anything like that. And so session 0 is a great option to not only talk about what safety tools you're using, but also to establish content boundaries and invitations. So things like which is what you would use stuff like lines and veils for, to talk about, what is not on the table. And this is also super helpful for you as a DM, because when you know what's not on the table, you know what you can actually lead into. It's like, I like to say it's like bungee jumping, where it's like, if you know that you've got a safety line and you know the boundaries of where you're following and how deep that's going to go, but you also know that you're going to be able to come back out, then you're great. You can feel safe doing that. But if you have no idea what people might not be cool with, exploring and playing, then you're kind of like tiptoeing around and being like, well, am I doing okay? Is this okay for everybody? So being able to establish at the very top and then continually throughout, if you're doing a long-term thing, what people are into, exploring what they're not, is super, super important. And you can do this several different ways, whether that's, an anonymous Google form or, just having a quick conversation, being like, hey, are people feeling this today? Because sometimes, one day maybe you're super gung-ho and into, I want to beat up the scariest monsters. And sometimes you're just like, you know what, today I just want to pet a puppy and just like go help a child. And you're like, cool, good to know. In that same breath, as we kind of talked about, also talking about content invitations. being explicit about what you do want to explore is also very helpful as for players and DMs to go, okay, so we know what we don't want to explore, we know what we do want to explore, and then we have everything that's kind of in between. And you can, with common sense, pull on whatever else is on the table to use in your games. Yeah, I think we mostly covered expectations and stuff. Yes. I'm just like, I have sort of an outline, but I'm just more interested in hearing what you guys have to say.
Yeah, I think just with finishing up expectations, I think when I was first getting into the hobby, I always thought that the GM was like a puppet master, like controlling everything from above. And I think with session 0 in particular, you really see how the whole thing is collaborative. And I think that can just inform like your play style. Like it's so wild how much easier it becomes to GM when you use a tool like this and you're collaborating with your players. It's great. Mwah.
Yeah, collaboration is key. As a DM, you're also another player at the table. You should also be having fun. And session 0 is just one of those things of making sure that everyone's having fun at the table, including you. And like we've said before, making it a lot easier for you in the long run. Because you might be doing like session 0s and like this little bit of work more often, but it means you have less work altogether. So it's great. It's a win-win for you. Yeah, so I'm specifically interested because all of you come from great different backgrounds of, actual play, of, private games, of convention and paid games and all that stuff. I want to hear more about, because the people who are watching, they may be coming in and having to run session 0s differently for different scenarios or people and all that stuff. How do you end up changing session 0s if you're playing with, friends you've been playing together with for 10 years versus, people you never played with before? And, what if you don't have time to do like set a whole like separate session 0 before, like a convention game where you're just going to be sitting down with people that you've never met before and they've never met you before and you're just going. How do you adjust session 0s yourself for your different play styles and play areas and play scenarios? I don't know how.
Yeah, that made sense. That was good.
Cool.
Surprisingly, it doesn't really change for the people I'm playing with. Like my girlfriend, we've been together for 3 years. She's probably the person I know most in the world besides like my sister. And I will still do a thorough session 0 whenever we are playing a game, just to like touch base. Every campaign is different. So setting doesn't matter as much to like what I do. I think for something like conventions or like when I was running for Magpie, sometimes I'll be doing a one shot. We've got 4 hours. We got to get a session 0 in there somehow. The way I'll adjust is my other session 0s are pretty kind of free form. Like we'll go in whatever order as long as we hit on everything. That's good. But for something that has a time limit, I'll write out a script. I'll kind of parse it down. If we're playing a one shot, I'll kind of write out content warnings. Like if I'm running Zombie World, there are zombies in it, and you might die from zombies or from these other things. Like that is a possibility with this game. So you'll know that going into a game of mine. And then I just kind of make sure we cover safety, and we usually do character creation at the table in my experience. So it's maybe skimmed down a bit, and I'm super efficient at it when I was like doing it regularly. But the content doesn't change too much except, streamlined.
So a lot of my session 0 work actually happens before session 0, especially coming from actual plays and paid games online. I can't bring a bunch of different concepts to the players and be like, which of these do you like? Because there's too many options, or people are indecisive. So what I normally do is I go, here's the game we're going to be playing, like here's the system we'll be playing, here's the basic story. So with Monster of the Week, I'll go, here's the basic mystery. You're all students at the school, a professor recently died, and while you were on vacation for winter break, you got an email from said professor with a prophecy attached. You come back to school, what happens next? And that sets the wheels moving. And part of that is I use what I believe is called CATS, which is an acronym for concept, aim, theme, and subject matter. And it's basically a way for you to basically have like a one-page blurb that tells your players, here's what's going on in the world, here's what's happening, roll with it. Like, let's see where it goes. And it allows you to also put like safety tools in there, but also talk about like, here's the world, here are the limitations, and allow you to set up so if you do have a sit down session 0, you can get through that stuff much quicker. Players already have ideas flowing for the characters. They can easily build them at the table, that kind of stuff. That way there's not a million questions about the world and what's happening in the world. So you're not spending too much time world building on your side and more world building for your players and what they're interested in and their stories. So I think that's really how I run it, whether it's actual plays or paid games. Especially with Start Playing Games, because I have to list a template on there that says, here's the game I'm running, here's what you'll be playing, that kind of stuff, and letting people know that ahead of time.
I think I really want to just like echo what RK is just dropping like wisdom bombs here, like out here being like, this is what I do and this is why you should do it, and I completely agree. For like an actual play scenario, I like RK, I have a premise already, and I'm like casting like players or seeking players who will be able to like grapple with, deepen, turn on its head, and just generally explore the themes that are prevalent in the premise and in the system, right? So like a dungeon crawl 4-shot using D&D 5th edition with 8th level players where death is probably going to happen I'm going to be looking for different types of players than for like a Royal Ball 1-shot where you're all like, you know, scheming scions of various houses, right? Like I would, like what one, you know, a player could play either of those systems, right? But like would be drawn to these different premises for different reasons. And I'd want to make sure that the players specifically for actual plays are the best suited players for that particular premise. And I want to say, I've never heard of the CATS abbreviation before, but I'm going to start using it because I feel like that's so helpful in like writing a pitch, basically. My screenwriting background actually comes into handy really well when it comes to like writing and flavoring pitches, because I'm so used to working with like a single sentence logline, right? Or like a 2-sentence logline being like, when X happens, Y must do Z or else, you know, A will occur, you know? So I'm always trying to think like, what are the players' objectives here, right? Like, what are they trying to accomplish? What's like the big finale that they can kind of expect going into this if it's like a paid game, right? Because paid games probably aren't persistent campaigns with no end date, right? Because like they're paying for a certain number of sessions, right? Or you're on like a monthly module if you're running paid games through Patreon or something, which I am doing, so I'm putting that in. But for instance, for like Magpie, like the longest term quote unquote campaign I've run, it was a 4-session Masks campaign, and I set it up like from the jump, like session 4, these two factions are gonna clash, and like like the players know it, I know it as a GM, and like the fun is like playing the tension up to the clash and trying to see if they can like gather allies, right, and like discover mysteries and secrets behind these two factions before the clash occurs. But they were all looking forward to like the final finale like battle, right? Like there was like no doubt, like no brainer, it was gonna happen. But they all knew it going in, and they were able to like design their like teenage superheroes with very strong and specific relationships to each of the two factions in question. So those are my 2 cents bouncing off of RK.
Yeah, you know what has a great kind of template for all this is Kian and I recently played Good Society, and they have a whole section about like, what genre is this? Do you care about historical accuracy? Like all of that kind of thing. And I think that is so useful, especially when you're doing something, you know, that has limited sessions or you're at a convention. Like that's such a great shorthand. Like, are we doing rom-com or are we doing like kind of brooding, introspective, in that case, Jane Austen era? Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess for those of you who are watching who are more, you're just running games for your friends or family at home, you do have a little more flexibility to build a pitch with the rest of your group there. But therefore, session zero is also really important because it goes, okay, you're starting from scratch. Where do you go? And session zero is a great way to go, okay, so what does everyone kind of want to play? And you can go from there where to say, oh, we want to do, go adventuring across Faerun. And you go, cool. Or is, I want to go into Barovia, or I, go to any of the other Ravenloft areas. Or they want to go into the Feywild, which, having the new module out is really helpful that way. So from there, once you start getting that, you can go, okay, maybe I can, and you can start asking like, oh, do we want to do a module? Do we want to do homebrew? That's also very helpful to know because, sometimes you might find it very useful to use a module. And sometimes the players will just want something and you might want something as a DM that's totally brand new and totally cool. And being able to understand where that's going is important. So session zero, basically just how much information are you getting and to what extent is going to be dependent on, how much time you have and how much space to customize you have. But there's always space to do session zero. I don't think there's any place where you cannot have a session zero whatsoever. Because like we've said before, you can do it in that game session. You can take the first hour to just be like, okay, so what do we want to do and all that stuff. And improv is going to be your best friend, as it always is with D&D or other TTRPGs and all that.
Yeah. And like, there's also an in-between like starting from nothing and going with one specific pitch is you can make multiple pitches, especially for friends. This summer, I played a Monster of the Week game with a bunch of college friends, and I made 6 different pitches and gave them all 6 and basically said, pick your top 3, we'll play the best one. And they all picked what they wanted. But you know what's great about that? I now have 5 ready pitches that are ready to go out for another game. And in fact, I did run another one of those during the summer as well for my paid games. And it worked out great because I knew what I was doing and it made it so that like work in the future was easier. Do less work. Just as a reminder.
Do less work. The motto of this panel. just do less work. Do this little bit of work here and then you're set. You're good. You're cool. That was all really, really cool insights into, how y'all have kind of adapted session zeros to each of your games. But I would really love to dive a little bit more into, there's so many different ways to run session zeros. What resources do y'all use? What types of, tips and tricks do you have that makes running session zeros a lot easier for you? Because that's, there's a lot of information that you're gathering, a lot of stuff that you're kind of seeking to get from your players. And sometimes players are kind of weird about giving that type of information because they're like, I don't know what I want. Like, how do you draw those tough answers out of them? I say tough answers, they're not. How do you encourage people to talk about these things and really get that information? Yes, hello.
Me. The thing I love most is using other games. It does not have to be the game you're about to run. I mean, I've used when coming up with characters and how the party knows each other, I've used Never Have I Ever. It's so easy. Everyone knows how to play it, and you learn so much without feeling like the pressure to like wax on about everything your character's been through. You're just like, do I think my character's done that? Yes or no? Okay, and then maybe you get to like tell a little bit about it, and you could maybe do it in character depending how much you've already done, but like that's a really short, simple one. I've used, like I said, I don't like world building in a vacuum. I don't like it. So I will use something like The Quiet Year, right? If we have the time, I will literally play another game and we'll all build the world and get ideas for our characters from that. I had a great session zero for a cipher game, but we used dialect to come up with like a specific slang for the world that we wanted to make. I think stuff like that is so useful. So if you have the time, I seriously recommend just doing a one shot of another game and seeing what that sparks. For a home game I ran, you know, we wanted bonds, so we pulled from some. It was a D&D game set in Waterdeep, but we wanted our party to have been together for a while. So we pulled from Powered by the Apocalypse games. We just went in there. We're like, what are the like debts and bonds and things that we could pull from this that we could kind of adapt to make it work for D&D? Like, okay, so how do our characters know each other? My character did this for you, or your character screwed my friend over, or whatever it is. But yeah, I think pulling from other games is a great way to just make your D&D session like and world sing. That's my biggest tip. My biggest tip.
Jumping
Play
off of that,
beer pong in character. Writing that down.
That would be amazing.
that would be so much fun. But jumping off of what Lauren said, playing games within games, I've actually played Microscope to build a world before, which has been so much fun because we ended up making a Papa John's Infinity Stones world, and it was so ridiculous and all over the place. But it was fun. We had a great time with that campaign, even though it was short, but like it was great. And then also just like I've mentioned this a ton is safety. I start off with safety because starting with that will tell me instantly who's about safety, like who's going to take safety seriously, but also who amongst the players would it be good to call on when it comes to like certain things, when it comes to like, oh, hey, what does your character do here? Like it lets me know before we even get to character building how my players will be reacting. Just going over safety. I always start it not just because it's like the important thing for like setting up characters so we're not touching subjects that other people don't want to touch, but also because it gives you a lot of information as a GM reading your players and being like, well, this player has been very attentive and like listening and like nodding along, so I'll call on them, see if they have any ideas for their character, that kind of stuff. And it helps you inform yourself to like try and get people out of their shells. And if you're running a game where you have one of your friends in it and a bunch of strangers, call on your friend. Make your friend, put them in the spotlight. Have them help you out. Have them break the ice. And I especially find that like as someone who's neurodiverse, as a player when I play in games, having someone else break the ice makes things so much easier. If someone else makes a joke that's really funny, or like if there's like safety tools that are ready in there, like it immediately makes things easier as a player. It makes it easier for me to follow along. It makes it me trust the GM and the other players more, having that sort of moment of understanding and conversation.
There's that
most
moment
of
of
my stuff has already been covered.
I was like, there's that pause. Yes, I knew it would happen. I love
Yeah.
that pause.
Yeah, it's like, well, both of those were things I would say in my own experience. So great. No, that's great. I'm so glad.
Thanks
you
for
guys
being
shared
so informed.
Problem.
those. Yeah, I mean, I think kind of, you know, going beyond that, finding what works for you in terms as a DM for not only collecting the information, but be able to go through and pick out what's most important to you to build off and work off. I often use a form, like a Google form or like a piece of paper, and I'll think about like what I specifically am looking to ask for my players to answer. So stuff about, you know, not only content boundaries and invitations, but also, you know, like what I think we've talked about this before, like what would you like at the end of this game to be the outcome of what, you know, your experience is. I've definitely had players who are like, I want you to kill my character as fast as you can. I'll make it a challenge. I'm like, cool,
Speedrun.
great. Let me just yeet Tarrasque at you. How fun, I guess. But you know, like being able to find what works for you there. So there's stuff like the Monty Cook safety checklist, which is a great form for there. There's, plenty of lines and veil sheets out there, which also includes stuff like invitations or like ask first, which is like, hey, maybe I think I do want to do this, but I would like you to like ask ahead of time before you do it, just in case. And it's also a great place to talk about relationships beyond like, how we met before, but like, are you going to have romantic relationships in your games? It's a great place to put that there too, because romantic relationship between player characters and NPCs or player characters and player characters can be really cool. Also not great if people don't consent to it. So like having that ahead of time, it's a good idea. So being able to find what makes sense to you, whether it's a free form conversation and you're just taking notes for yourself, or you're like, here, spend 5 minutes filling out this form, give it back to me, and I'll read through it, and I'll come back to you with the key bits of information. Like I said before, there's like tons of different tools out there and tons of different safety tools and toolkits and resources that are out there to help with this type of stuff. It's all about what's going to work for you and what's going to work for the rest of your players. So I really would suggest taking the time for you as a DM and at the table to go through and go, what works? If you already know your players, then that's great, because you can kind of go, well, I mean, nobody really wants to spend 5 minutes filling out a form, and that's fine. We'll just talk instead. And sometimes it'll be like, people don't really want to be, tell everyone about all this, straight up. So let me just give you a piece of paper and you can answer these questions privately, and I'll read them and we'll make sure that all of that's anonymous, but all the information's still there anyways. So getting a good read on what you and your table need is important. Be aware of that. That what works for one game will not work for another. What works for one person will not work for another. So find what works best for you. Got anything else, Connie? Have we taken all the words from you?
Y'all said a lot of great things. I'm low-key like taking notes here. Like, oh, my God, all right, I'm gonna do that next time. Okay, I'm learning here. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many cool things I've heard of people doing their session zeros that I just want to try. Like this idea of like, I've heard of people like rolling out a piece of graph paper, and session zero, everyone just draws the world map. Like 30 minutes, people sit down, people just draw on it, right? Or like rolling out the graph paper, everyone just pulls all their dice together and then you draw the boundaries of the map along like how the dice spill. So there's just like, especially in a home game, like a kitchen table game with your friends, like you have so much latitude to just like do stuff. You could just be like, you know what? Let's spend 30 minutes, an hour together, just like building this world together, using these like other systems like Microscope or like Never Have I Ever or like any other sort of system that's out there, like to like flesh it out. Such a great idea. I also think in terms of world building, because Lauren, I feel like I'm on not the opposite side, but I'm definitely farther away from you in terms of like how I feel about world building. Yeah. I really like it. I'm like one of those GMs who like, I'm a little bit of a control freak sometimes. I like being able to be like, this is the Citadel of Darkness. When my players is like, I feel like my character is actually, and I'm like, no one's ever been inside the Citadel of Darkness. It's important to me. Yes. So I think like laying expectations during session zero of how much control players will have over the world is important as well. Because I've had players who are like, I want to be able to collaborate. I want to be able to name the barkeeps. I want to be able to say that there's also a Citadel of Light that opposes the Citadel of Darkness. Like, I want to be able to do this and that, right? And then there will be players who will be like, I don't want to know jack crap about anything. I want you to tell me. I want to discover stuff that you make for me, right? And it's also complicated when you have those two exact same types of people at the same table, because then you still like, you sort of have to like learn to juggle personalities as well as like different kinds of desires while you're in play. And session zero is a great sampler for that. You can sort of be like, okay, this person's looking for this, that person's looking for that. Got it, right? So there's no like right or wrong answer, right? There's no like, oh, it's wrong to let your players collaborate on your game and you're a bad GM if you don't like world building. Like, that's not true, right? It's also not true that you're a quote unquote bad GM if you're like, I have a very specific world that I've spent a lot of time building and I'm inviting you into this realm, as opposed to like you being creators of this realm. Like both forms and everything in between and outside of that are valid ways of play. Just make sure you're on the same page about it before it begins, right? Like how much power is a player going to have over like the shape of the world, which I think is different from player agency, because I'm a strong proponent of like player agency in every game. And that's different from like being able to control what happens in the world, I think.
Totally.
Completely. I have so many thoughts.
Yeah, we're like,
Yeah.
Yes.
Like so many.
Yeah. God, we're running, getting close to the end of our time here. So I do want to, let everyone have a last little word about, session zeros. There were many things we talked about in the last, 45, 50 minutes. But I would love to hear, anything, last thoughts, last bit of tips, anything that you want our viewers today to take away from our conversation today when they're going into their own games and starting to run their own session zeros. What words of wisdom do you all have? No pressure.
Hi, I'm a GM who has a really bad memory. So my games with friends and games that are being paid, I record. And then what I do is that when it's about time for the next session, I will re-watch the session at 2x speed and take any notes that I need and prep for the future session. That has cut down my prep time from hours and hours and hours to about 2 hours for a 3-hour game, which isn't bad. And that's like not even just session zeros, but like everything. I record every session just because it makes my life so much easier and allows me to run. I think at one point I was running 5 games a week, so I only had 2 days where I wasn't running a game. Makes it much easier to do that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yeah. They get mixed up when you're doing so many. I remember having to do that many games. It's a lot. Lauren, Connie?
yeah. I'll hop in. GMs, hi, hello. Don't worry, fam. You just let others, like, you can outsource things, especially, like, even in session 0, like, with, safety, like, it's not just all on you, right? You make a collaborative Google Doc, you make a collaborative Spotify playlist or Pinterest board, right? That everyone can get in on. So just like what you can, like, you don't have to come up with why the party's together. You could, maybe that's in your pitch. That would be really cool, but you don't have to. Like, you are at that table with the people you want to play with and you decide what your campaign is going to be there. And it's just not all on you. So, yeah, that's what I would like to leave everyone with. Connie?
My last piece of advice is going to be very specific. This is for if you are in a session 0 and you have a specific pitch, and it's either for a one shot or for like a 4-shot or something, or like a smaller campaign, or not even, but this only applies if you have a specific pitch that all the players have already bought into. Come up with a list of, I would say, 3 to 5 pitch-specific questions. Like, for example, if you're running D&D 5th edition and the pitch is the professor pitch, right? Like, a list of questions I'm already thinking of is like, how do you all know the professor? You vacation together on winter break, where'd you go? Like, who got too blackout drunk on the break, and like who ended up in jail, right? And like who ended up having to call their mom, right? Something like that, right? Just like really specific questions that will then like help establish relationships between the characters, how they feel about each other, and also their specific buy-in to the pitch. Like, so they already know by session 1 why they're here, why they're investigating the death of this professor, right? And like why, that email matters so much to them and why them specifically. So that would be my final piece of advice, I think. And like have a lot of fun thinking of these questions, right? This is like the fun part of GMing. Like you're deciding this. This is when your puppet master can sort of like come out a little bit. Like you're designing the little strings attached to your little players. Characters. And yeah, the kinds of questions you ask will also definitely shape the tone and the themes of the game too. So no pressure, really no pressure, seriously. But this is like your chance to sort of like shine and like show your devious side a little bit and like communicate to the players the things you care about and the things hopefully that they'll care about too when it comes to the campaign. I guess that's my parting piece of advice because y'all all said such amazing things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a summary. Yeah, what's up?
One thing. This is something that has saved my life. Give scheduling to one of your players. Make one of your players responsible for scheduling.
Yes.
That's it.
Session 0 is a great way to set expectations on who schedules and what your schedule is. Yeah, I think that's our time. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming in and listening. Thank you all of our wonderful panelists who came in and sprouted their wisdom. Please go check them out. You can see their Twitter handles and all that stuff. And we hope you have a great rest of your D&D Celebration 2021. We'll see y'all later.
Bye.